Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversational Witchcraft with me, Dawn, the Kitchen Witch. If you haven't yet, make sure you go on and follow and like and subscribe to this podcast. We've got so much great stuff coming down the pike. And first and foremost, we have got to talk about tonight's guest. This is Antonio Pagliarulo. Antonio Pagliarulo, a New York guy after my own heart. He is the author of The Evil Eye, The History, Mystery, and Magic of the Quiet Curse. He writes regularly about spirituality, witchcraft, and paganism, and the intersection of folk magic with popular culture and religion, which I think is just fantastic.
Pleasure to be here.
I am so happy to have you.
I am so thrilled to be here, and it is true. I am a native New Yorker, and my partner is actually a native from New Jersey. But same
So it's tri-state. It's the same. Again, it's the same thing. Same thing. We were having so much fun, like literally before I hit record. We've talked about everything already, from like growing up in New York to moving to New England to I don't know. Like I said, when we first like hit the button to see each other, I was like, oh, it's cousin Tony. Like we've been like,
I said, I said, Joy, can you see me? It was like, yeah, what's going
oh,
on?
yeah, how are you?
What's doing?
How are you? It's funny because there are folks that maybe listen to this broadcast that maybe don't know that I'm from New York originally, but now I'm going to hang out with you all night and it's going to come out. You could take the girl out of New York, but you can't take the New York out of the girl. Now, right before we hit record, we were talking about how I don't speak Italian. I mean, lasagna, manicotti, mozzarella, that's like all I speak in Italian. Also guilt. I do speak guilt.
I'm fluent in that as well.
I'm fluent in guilt. I don't use it, but I can speak it. But you were saying that you do speak fluent Italian because your parents are immigrants.
My parents are immigrant. They came here as teenagers, both from the south of Italy. And when I grew up in the Bronx, we lived in our neighborhood, the houses, that sort of typical two-family. We were upstairs, and my grandparents, my mom's parents, who spoke no English, they only spoke Italian, lived downstairs, and they spoke the dialect of their region, in the Campania region. And so we grew up, my siblings and I grew up, speaking the dialect, which Neapolitan, it's a derivative really of Neapolitan. When you think about it, I mean, I think of Neapolitan actually as its own language, more than a dialect. Yeah. It really is. But so we grew up speaking every day. It was just back and forth. My parents and my mom, actually, interestingly, was born in Italy, but spent many years as a kid living in Argentina, and then came to New York, to the United States. So I grew up in a house, and I can, depending, my mom will still speak to me in Italian, and sometimes when she starts speaking in Spanish, I know I'm in something I might be in a certain kind of trouble, or maybe I did something right. I don't know. It depends on the words and stuff. But yeah, we grew up in a multilingual, but it was mainly Italian, English, but my mom spoke to her parents, believe it or not, a lot of the time in Spanish as well. So it was this three, but my dad's from Bari, from down south, and when my mother's from the Campania region in Italy as well, and we just grew up speaking both. It was very natural, and I'm so now, as an adult, I'm so grateful that I have that, because it's helped me, and it helps you. It helps just with relations, even just knowing culturally certain things. You look at things, you read things, and you just know, and it brings back a lot of memories too.
Well, and it connects you to heritage, and it connects you to, origin stories, and it connects you to homeland of a people that you came from. And I think there is something really deeply primal about that kind of connection. I don't speak a word of Italian. My grandmother, so never really had a very close relationship with my father's side of the family. His side of the family is Sicilian, and my mother's side of the family is Napolitan. So it's my maternal grandmother who I knew and grew up with, right? She came over when she was like 6 or 7 with her parents, And they didn't like, they didn't speak a word of English, but they told their kids, this is the 1920s, late 1920s. And they were like, we moved to America, you speak English. You
Yeah.
don't speak Italian. You could speak Italian in the house if you want to, but they discouraged it, right?
Yeah.
So the grandparents, my great grandparents, only spoke Italian, but their kids spoke English to them. So then when my grandmother grew up in New York, in Queens, she only spoke English, and that language sort of died with the great grandparents, my great grandparents, her parents. And that, I feel like I've always felt really sad about that. I've missed out on that. I tried to take Italian in high school. That didn't go so well. Um, but
It's
I've
so
oh, right, it didn't go so well. But I've always felt like I missed out on that. And as I am now an adult in my 40s, I don't have connection with that part of myself. And I would love to have it, you know? Don't you
it's
feel
not
like
an
that's so
uncommon.
important?
Oh, I feel like it's so important. I do. But it's not an uncommon story. Even growing up in the neighborhood where I grew up, which was very, very diverse in the Bronx. It wasn't only an Italian, neighborhood. We had many ethnicities where in the neighborhood where I grew up. And um, I have to say, of the Italian families and the kids I grew up with and I went to a very small, private, very Catholic grammar school, and very small. But of the kids who I grew up with who had whose parents were immigrants, I think I remember two who were in, sort of my situation where they grew up speaking Italian, but the majority of the others, no, it was very, as you said, it was discouraged. And I feel like that's because I've had this discussion many, many times with people who've said to me, like I grew up, my parents discouraged it, or my grandparents said, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
That was a pretty common thing. They just wanted everyone, I think, to assimilate and just don't talk about that, or don't, ignore it, or just concentrate on learning English. And nobody really retained it very much. So I mean,
Why do you think that was? And what do you think that, and just speaking about Italians specifically, what do you think that a lot of us have lost because that was discouraged at that time?
well, I think it was literally, I mean, I remember my grandfather always would say to me, "Oh, you don't know how fortunate you are because you grew up, you have the line," he would say, "You have la lingua, you have the language already here. So you have such an advantage of being here," because he came here and never learned to speak English. So I think I know in a lot of the Italians I grew up with, the older generations, there was just this need to assimilate and to let the kids assimilate. There was this fear that this process would be repeated. They didn't want their kids to go through what they went through, not understanding this, not reading that, not doing that. And so that was their way of saying, you know what, this is where you are, and let's just, we want you to learn this way of life. And in some cases, yeah, a lot of the language, not the traditions in a lot of cases didn't get lost. I mean, I do know traditions were kept up in the home and things like that, depending upon the home, but the language certainly got lost. And I think, you know, I think what is lost in that is there's a certain vernacular kind of magic that's lost in it, because even when the prayers, and I've listed a few of them in the book that I wrote them out phonetically, and the words that are spoken in Neapolitan, for example, that I've written out phonetically, there's magic in those words and in the way they're spoken. And you have to know, and but don't worry, I will teach you, Dawn. You will know how
Thank you.
to speak.
Thank
Speak
Thank you.
dialects. Yeah, that's
Besides
cool.
the fungal, other than that, I got nothing. But I think it's so interesting, and again, we've just learned that you and I are pretty much the same age. And so our parents are close in age, and generationally speaking, like we're all growing up at the same time. And it's very interesting to think that like my relatives were like, nope, you don't speak
Yeah.
Italian. And your relatives were like, well, we're going to hold on to this piece and maintain that heritage. And I think that's incredible. I think that's incredible. And I'm a little jealous, I'm not gonna lie. And you do talk so much about in your writing, especially in this book, The Evil Eye, which is awesome. And we're going to like totally talk about it
Yeah,
in more depth, but you talk about, like you just touched on, the traditions that get passed down. And this sort of lingual tradition is one thing, but it's that folk magic that's coming through. I say all the time, I'm a little Italian kitchen witch who learned how to kitchen witch from her grandma, who had no idea she was a kitchen witch.
right.
She didn't know. She just did these things, and it was just what you did.
It's what you did. And I also say, when talking about folk magic and the rituals of the evil eye, or diagnosing, or other folk magic rituals that certainly perhaps I've not written about in this book, or that I might have written about in articles in other places, or that I still practice on my own, I always say that it's folk magic. And my grandparents, who I grew up with downstairs, would never, they didn't know they were practicing what they knew. And did they know that it was probably something outside of what the church, yeah, they knew, because that was fine, but it wasn't, they would never have considered themselves witches,
Mm-hmm.
or have used those words. I mean, in Italy, if you call someone una strega, that's not a compliment.
Well,
In
not now, not
not,
anymore.
I not right. I mean, there's a whole big thing about how so much of this stuff, going back to it, my grandparents were doing these kinds of rituals that are folk magic, but they didn't consider themselves, like your grandmother. She was a kitchen witch and didn't
100%.
necessarily know that the magic she was doing in that kitchen is magic. And
Right.
it's
Like,
the way they, it's not only the ingredients, it's the way that they stirred things, it's the way they spoke to the food, it's the way they connected with it, how they taught you to.
yes. Yeah. Little things like, and I've told this story before when I've had conversations with herbalists, which is interesting, but like, I can remember being little and being at my grandmother's house and being this time of year, early spring. And she would go outside and she would say, "Come on, we're going to make dandelion omelet." And we would go out into the yard and we would pick dandelions. And I was like, "Dandelions are weeds, grandma. Like, you're crazy, you know?" And she would be like, "No, dandelion is the first, thing that comes up in spring and it's sacred because of this." And she never would use the word sacred, but she would talk about how nutritious it was and how it does this and it does that. And we're going to chop it up. And she would take the stems and she would be chomping on the stems of the dandelion while she was sauteing the greens and making eggs. And and you're like, you're a kid and you're like, my grandmother's insane. And then you get older and you're like, oh, that reverence for earth, the understanding of why it's important to have reverence for
Mhm.
this little plant, the nutritional value, the non-wastefulness,
Absolutely, yeah.
of a first of all, of a people in general, and then also of a generation, growing up in the depression. And the dandelion omelet thing, something she got from her mother, because they had very little in Italy. So they would go out into the yard and they would say, "Okay, what are we growing and what can we eat and what's edible?" That's all tactile, practical folk magic
Mhm.
in understanding how we use what earth is giving us and why to use what earth is giving us.
And they understood, like when you explained what your grandmother understood, and what they understood was also the nourishment, not only the nutrients, not only the physicality of it, if you're nourishing your body. They understood, even if they didn't say it, they understood that these herbs, these things, these rituals, they were nourishing the soul, they were nourishing the spirit. And that was
Yes.
done through the speech, the speaking about, no, use this, chewing on it, how it's cultivated. My grandfather grew, in the basement of our home, he made wine. We had the wine,
Of course.
I have the
The
picture.
grappa.
Yeah, or the
The
grappa.
grappa.
Yeah, I mean, you really have grappa. That's yeah, the best. But he used to make wine, and he had that press. And aside from that, he had huge tomato gardens, both
Mm.
here and in upstate New York. And he used to do all of his planting based on the phases of the moon. Now,
Oh,
I
you talk about
remember,
that in the book.
yeah,
Can you talk a little bit? Like, I don't want to take anything. If you really want to hear the story, read the book, but I would love to hear you tell that whole story.
he would absolutely do all his planting. He knew just from growing up, in an agricultural town, a town where that's all they had, he did all of his planting, all of his by the phases of the moon. And he could look at the sky and look and say, oh, no, I understand this or this. He also made the wine after the wine was made and, went into these big jugs, you had like walls of wine and walls of mason jars of tomatoes all over the basement that lasted you for almost a year. And it was always outrageously delicious. But he would move the wine up on another shelf based upon what phase of the moon has the moon changed. And I knew that early on, but I didn't quite understand it until I was in my teenage years and I really started to get more interested in, I knew my whole life that I was a practitioner and that I'm a practitioner. But when I really started to seek it out and understand what was going on around me, that was one of the things I remembered right away. And I would say, and he would say, well, la luna è piena, the moon is full of la luna, and it goes back to my mother tells the story that when she was pregnant with me, she was very late. And I don't know, I was probably due on like the 8th of that month, or this, and I was born on the 13th of that month. Anyway, she always tells the story that my grandfather told her, just sit tight because he's not going to be born until this happens with the moon, until this particular phase, because his belief growing up, it was basically at that time of the month when the moon was, and then I was born during, I believe, the very dark of and he believed that, and he always practiced that. It was part of what he grew up with. And he told her, you're not going to give birth until the moon changes and moves into this phase. And
Wow.
the mother was like, all right, what am I going to do? And she always says, even to this day, and she says, he was, within a 24-hour period, like he was right. She said, he said those 2 days.
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
born on, the 13th of that month. And I think he told her it would be between, the 11th, or the 12th or the
Yeah.
13th. Was the 12 and the 13, I think, was the thing.
And you
And
said earlier that you're born on the Feast of St. Anthony.
I am a June 13th baby. I'm born. So I came with my name, as my mother said, and as my grandfather told
Wow.
me that I came
In
with the.
this particular phase of the moon that your grandfather was like, nope, this is when this kid is
That's
coming
what
because
it
that's
was.
when babies are
Yeah.
born. And this is right. So
Most
you're
outrageous food, by the way, the most outrageous, speaking agriculturally, about the phases. I remember he had the most outrageous garden, not only the tomatoes, we'd have these, the pumbarolas would come and ahumarola. They were so delicious and so, I mean, just outrageous, tasted of the earth. I still remember the taste of these spread, the basil he grew, the rosemary, the mint. After, years later, he would love to chew on mint, and he believed very profoundly, again, in some of the properties. And he didn't necessarily say, oh, this, I write about mint in the book as something. I write about the magical properties, of it briefly with regard to the evil eye and how it can help you in certain ways. But he didn't get into that aspect of it. But he would say, this is something that's, have this at least, twice a week, do this because it's going to help you in a lot of ways. And that's how they sort of passed on this knowledge.
right. If we're chewing on mint, it's good for our digestion. Physically, it's good for our digestion. It's great for heartburn and all those things. But magically, we're speaking about mint being good for emotional digestion.
Mhm.
Magically, we're speaking about mint being a purifier. It's a protector. It's all these things. And it's like innately, because of these folk traditions, they knew and they passed that on. So I want to go back to something that you said earlier, where you said it was around your teens
Yeah.
where you realized, oh, hang on a second. This moon magic thing, the folk traditions and all that. You went to a traditional Italian Catholic school. Am I correct?
Was a Catholic, a very, the Catholic school. And it was, I mean, there was Italian, Irish, there was all, just, it was a Catholic school, a lot of Italians certainly, but also a lot of Irish, a lot of
Right.
Latin America. We had a lot of different ethnicities, but the school was a Catholic private school. Yes. And
Right. Your nuns were very influential.
they were.
Right.
My nuns are still, and I always say that my nuns are still in habit, like the order of nuns that educated me. And I always say, they were excellent teachers. We got my sister and my brother always say, the education was good. But yes, we did go to a very, very Catholic school. And
Right.
and then
Right. So then, like you said, I've always been a practitioner and I kind of always knew that. But was there a pivotal moment? Was there a light bulb moment where you were like, oh, I'm a witch, or oh, this is witchcraft, or finding that and going, oh, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, I understand what strega is now, and that's who I am. Was there a moment, or was it gradual? Did you find it gradually, or was it a light bulb moment?
oh, what a great question. Yeah, when I think back on it, and I've thought back on it a lot, I I think like most of us, I knew before there was anything to know, and
Mhm.
you know it, but I can always think back to an experience I actually had, interestingly, in church, in a Catholic church, in the church we went to in the Bronx, and I was probably 12 or 13, and I prayed desperately for something, and I felt it for the first, and I think looking back, I understood it made after it came to pass that what I asked for, which was largely in my mind impossible anyway, this sort of miracle that was a personal thing for me and to the saint I prayed to, that it came to pass afterwards. I think that was what opened up for me this realization that the mind and the intention and how we can connect with what's very, very close to us. Actually, I always say, and I think I write it in the book, that when people talk about the other side, or the spiritual realm, there's this idea, oftentimes, not always for people, but sometimes, that it's out of reach, that it's really far away. Going back to that experience with prayer, and with what I can realize now was meditation as well, because as I was really meditating, as I was praying, I realized that it made me understand that the spiritual world, the other side, is not far away. It's beside us right now. It's right here. It's right here. Whoever, the spirits that we're calling upon are right here. It's not, you know, the veil is there, sure, but it's right with us, and it's not far out. And that was the pivotal moment for me when I turned back and realized that.
The veil is never really that far away. We talk about above, below, and within, and
Right.
these things, again, I think oftentimes the perception is that they are other than us,
Mhm.
but they are not other than us. We are them and they are us. We're just on different planes. So more like um, three pieces of paper in a notebook together, above, below, within, versus three separate notebooks with three separate covers laid out on a table.
Yes,
It's
exactly. Very well
just
said. Yeah.
and easily to turn the page, to
Mhm.
find, just like you said, reaching out, like, especially when it comes to, in my experience, ancestral work,
Mhm.
right? Like, and that's a challenge for someone like me who doesn't have those deep ties to biological family and that biological connection. And I had someone tell me once, you might not know your ancestors, but they know you, right? Because in talking about, like, getting older and going, well, I'm so much more interested, and I'm leaning into my Italianness,
Mhm.
you and
Yeah.
being like, oh, being connected with that, and through the food and culture and all of those things, it is right here. And
Yeah.
our gods and our whoever we're worshiping, whoever we're praying to. And I'm going to put the word prayer in quotes because for me, prayer is meditation, it's energy work, it's spells, it's all those things. It's just another word for how you perceive the energy you're putting out, just for
Yeah.
me. But it is right here.
Mhm.
And I love that you were able to perceive that at a young age.
It was a tremendous, tremendous gift. And I realized it right after, of course, it happened. And that changed, totally flipped my life on a, the other way. And that's what led me completely on this path. And it was also, I went from a very, very Catholic
Mm.
private school, where there were, I think we graduated, I think there were 23 kids in my class when we graduated. And we
Oh,
had all 23 of us had gone from kindergarten to eighth grade together. So, and that's why, I'm still in touch with many of my grammar school friends, but
wow.
we grew up together. But after that, eighth grade, I um, went off to had this experience, which was like, whoa, I went to a public um, school here in Manhattan, which was like, talk about
Mm.
culture shock. I
Mind blown.
Mind blowing. Yeah. And I went to a specialized high school here in the city. And I got another a great gift because I got to meet all these, kids who were of different ethnicities and backgrounds. And that was when and I think I mentioned at the beginning of the book that I met these kids who were talking about the evil eye just in different terms and in different words. And
Yeah.
I had thought, wait a minute, what do you mean that what malocchio is? And they were like, what's no, I'm talking about, this, or they would say it. And we started talking about the things we did and how those, again, folk traditions and the folk magic of that came through, um, based, from their own families, their own ethnicities, their own cultures, their own countries. So that was a huge other big
Yeah.
gift that woke me up and made me, led me even further, thankfully, on the path of magic, witchcraft. Um, yeah, definitely. That was a huge.
So, how do you go from what I would call a budding witchlet in high school, where you're learning about witchcraft, and you're also, listen, adolescence, and I'm using adolescence as the time between, let's say, 13 and 18, 13 and 20, when we're all still kind of figuring it the fuck out, right? Right. And it's not just about spirituality. We're learning who we are, what we like, where we want to go. There's a lot of pressure, right? It's the 90s. We're like, I don't know, every life is great. I don't think people at that age right now could possibly understand what it was like to grow up in the 90s, because everything was awesome. Like, we didn't live in a world of school shootings and
No,
pandemics, and I think it was like the last great period to be a kid growing up.
no email, no email, no, I
Right, there was no
on
email,
high
there was
school.
no internet. Thank
No.
God there was no internet when I was a teenager.
Remember, we
There
went
were
to the library to research our papers and,
right.
go to the library. It's like, wow,
It was the birth of the internet. Like, we learned about the internet in internet classes, and we had dial up, and you couldn't take dirty pictures of yourself and post them anywhere.
No, no,
And that's why I say thank God there was no camera phones when I was a kid.
no, it was a
Um,
time,
it'd
yeah.
be very bad. But how do you go from all that self-discovery, and you just seem like you were way more self-aware than most adolescents are. It sounds like you were way more before to have these moments as an adolescent. How do you go from I'm an adolescent discovering my witchcraft and my spirit and my heritage to becoming this amazing writer and writing books on evil eye and writing books on witchcraft? Like, what happened in the middle, Antonio?
I think, looking back, I don't know that I was all too self-aware. Look, I still feel like I'm figuring things out for real. Sometimes I'm like, what do I still have a lot to figure out, man. And I have, like everyone, I think, those moments. But I was what happened is that I think, thankfully, my mom was always very, very encouraging. And I always tell people she was, an immigrant, but she was, unlike so many, a lot of people would say to me, oh, the typical sort of, do you have to do this because your mom, did this or that? And a lot of these stuff is true. I had to call my mother if I was going to be late, and I had to find a payphone, because if not, the cops were dispatched, because the anxiety level, it was like, where are you? Got to be home at 4. That's it. So
Yes.
those things, it was like, this Italian household where I told you to be home, you better be home. But my mother was very, very always, encouraging of different things. When I went to the high school of performing, like LaGuardia High School, I went to the high school of performing arts. Um, she was very encouraging, not only with me, but with my sister, my brother, and my parents in general. Were very, very much like, go and do that and explore and see what it is that you're gonna like. And when I was a teenager and I loved, spending my Saturdays, books were just for me, I must have been a book in a past life, because books were just my greatest, joy and my passion. I still, to get a book in the mail, it's like I can't walk around and not have a book with me. And growing up as a teenager, to read for hours and hours was just my thing, and I loved it. And they never discouraged anything. When I said I like writing and I want to write about this and I want to write about that, it was I think looking back, it was vital, and it was a great gift that there was never that sense of, that's nice, but you're not going to be able to do that. It was never put in me like that. My mother was very, like, oh, okay, let's see, what are you going to do? And write this, write that. My dad liked to look at the articles I wrote. My mom's sister, my aunt, who also was always very, very involved, always encouraged. My siblings, I'm the youngest of three. So there was a lot of encouragement. My brother, my sister encouraged. That had a profound, effect, that I knew I had people who were rooting for me, sort of in that sense. With regard to the magic and the writing, I remember also a pivotal point, realizing when I went to the library and finding Leo Martello's Witchcraft, the Old Religion, as a teenager, finding this
Yeah.
and reading it and saying, oh my gosh, like, this is really cool stuff. And a lot of it resonated with me. A lot of it was completely new. I didn't know, a lot of what these roots that he was writing about and in practices. I didn't know any of those things, but it was fascinating to me. And that led me further into this, into the path of magic. And knowing that I was always writing, that was always those were my two sort of my outlets. They weren't, like going in different directions. It was just the same thing. For me, there was, writing was magic, but magic was always being, was sort of the story that was always being written inside of my head. I just never sort of separated the two.
Right. And your first life experiences and growing up in a house that was practicing Italian folk magic because
Yeah.
it's just what you did.
Yeah.
You can't, and we talk about this often on the show. You can't really separate the magic or the witchcraft from the person, because we are the magic. It's how we move through the world. It's in our everyday things. It's not always about this ritual we're doing outside, or this pointed thing that we're doing a spell or whatever. It is in the practical things that we do every day. So it's in your writing, because you are that craft that
Right.
you are putting onto the page. You can't separate it out. It is part of you. My husband is a musician,
Yeah.
and when we first met, I realized very quickly he is the music. The music is him. It's never going to be not who he is. You can't separate that out and go, well, that's a nice thing that you like to do, but it's, just like you saying, I am a creative person, I am a writer, and your parents saying, it is you, it is part of you, and there is no separation. And I think I want to make a point to say, if there are people out there that are listening to this and you have children, here is an example of someone who was fully encouraged to be 100% who you are, to do the things you love to do, to go explore and find what made you joyful and what made you this amazing individual. And in that way, you were able to flourish as yourself. And I grew up in an opposite environment to that and have struggled every step and going, oh, am I good enough? Oh, I don't know. Oh, maybe it's not going to work out, and fought with it. I mean, it's like 2 decades worth of therapy to be like, yeah, man, I can do what I'm doing.
Sure.
you know, but the amount of encouragement that your parents gave you
Yeah.
to have the space to find what it was that you loved. I mean, even going to a performing arts school,
Big
if
deal.
I,
Yeah, that was scary for them. I have to admit,
yeah,
that was a big deal. I didn't, there was a while after I got accepted where I thought to myself, like, I was like, Mom, like I'm doing this. And it was taking the train, the 6 train to out of the Bronx to probably either 125th or all the way to 42nd, the shuttle to Times Square, the 1 or the 9 back then, they were still away to 66th Street at Lincoln Center. So it was a big deal,
yeah,
but again, that encouragement, and it was also, my sister is a gifted, painter and an artist, and my brother is a musician. He can pick up a guitar and just like, or instruments and just play that kind of thing. And again, that too, yeah, it was encouraged. It was never frowned upon. It was
right.
just okay. Yeah, it was encouraged, and it was more of a big deal, I have to say, when I said I'm going to this high school, and it wasn't a Catholic high school, and that's what they were used to.
Yeah,
Don't forget. But and it was an hour and a half at that time to get to from the Bronx on 4 different trains one
yeah,
way. So that was more of sort of that was a pretty big hurdle. It was funny to think back on it about how I give my mother credit. I'm still to this day, I'm like, Mom, you really, you let me go at 14 years old on this train. And
I wouldn't have let my kid
yeah,
go. If I had a kid right now,
I-
I'd be like, you're not going on any train by yourself to Midtown.
no, and it was funny. I remember having to get up at like 5 or saying it's
Yeah,
dark in the winter, and I'd leave the house
yeah,
and she'd come out the window and she'd watch me go down the street, and then I had to turn the corner and walk to the train, which was a 10-minute walk, but she couldn't see me. And I used to say to her, Mom, once I get to the corner, like, you're not going to see me, so you can't. And it didn't matter. She had to watch me go down,
yeah.
and it
Until
was
she couldn't
funny
see you anymore.
until she couldn't. And my grandfather would, downstairs was constantly, you know, um, every morning there was, God forbid there was a bad dream. If I woke, if he had a bad dream, there were symbols in dreams. That was another aspect of things.
Wow.
He would say, "Shadabatien," which means be careful today. I dreamt of, pears were a very bad thing in his, where he grew up, like the symbology of it. Water was not from his area of a good symbol. Like, there were different things that were more omens. And so I would wake up sometimes and be ready to go to school. And I'd go downstairs and he'd already be up, of course, if I'm reading his newspaper. And my grandmother too, although by the time I was in high school, my grandmother had passed on, but my grandfather would warn if there was a bad dream. That was like part of also, sort of the folk magic that went into it. These dreams and these symbols that you were, told to recognize. And it,
Wow.
it
Wow.
that was the biggest
So
thing.
that is going to lead us right into talking about your new book, The Evil Eye. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our amazing sponsors, and then we're going to come right back and we're going to get into your amazing new book. It's really incredible and people need to know about it. So we'll be right back with the incredible Antonio Pagliarulo. Uh,
That-
be right back. Welcome back. We're here with the amazing Antonio Pagliarulo. I'm having the
Mhm.
best time with you, cousin Tony. That's how I'm going to call you from now on.
I told you we knew each other before we met. So
100%, 100%. We must have met somewhere.
I
I
don't
mean,
know
we
what I
grew
think.
up in New York at the same time.
Yeah, but it's the energy, it's the energetic stuff. I'm telling you, it's like I said, as soon as I saw you, I didn't say, "Oh, John, it's so nice to meet you and see you." I was like,
Like,
"Hey,
how's it going? Yeah.
what's going on?"
So let's talk about your amazing new book, The Evil Eye, right?
Yeah, here,
It's
it's there.
really, so I don't have a physical copy. Your publisher only sent me a digital copy, or I would be holding it up right now.
Let me hold it up.
Uh,
Cool.
it's so good because it really does take a lot of the questions out of it. And I have so many things I want to talk to you about in terms of what you've got going on in this book. And we don't have a ton of time left, but I'm so excited. So um, you touched on it a little bit before about finding the evil eye in all these other cultures,
Right.
right? Throughout the globe, all these other cultures, all these other religions. I want to know, how did you find these things besides talking to people, that you're going, oh, you've heard about this in high school, but like, where did you dig up that kind of research? And also, was there any place that you were really surprised that this popped up in any culture? You're like, wow, that's really surprising that it's here. And also, how are they similar and how are they different in the cultural aspects?
So I the interesting thing is that, again, growing up knowing about it and having, my grandmother who always did it, diagnosed Maloka, removed it, and that was, just everyday life growing up. Um, when I decided, so the evil eye itself, the whole, the energy of what it is, it's been such a huge part of my life, like a lot of people, from so many different ethnicities and cultures. It's a part of your everyday life. You're raised to believe in the eye and in that energy and in the dangers of jealousy and envy and resentment. But I knew I wanted to write a book about it, and I did know going into it. I knew that it was something ubiquitous, that it was in so many cultures, so many countries. I knew that from years of other research, and just coming across it constantly was something that I always, looked at and researched. And being a writer and being someone who does, who interviews and does research, in this book, I didn't find that the meaning of the evil eye, which is a curse that is, cast through a look or a glance, and it's born from envy and jealousy and negativity, all of that, um, that definition I have found really went across the spectrum. There was nothing that really sort of veered out of the way. What veered a little bit, what I was surprised at in the interviews and in speaking to people, was one, a lot of people a lot of people want to speak about it, but they don't necessarily want to be open about it. And I think that's an interesting thing, because growing up, not only growing up, but even as an adult, I've had people who have come up to me, or I've been surrounded. I was at a job, I worked once for a nonprofit, and I was the crazy, new age guy in my office.
Right.
I had
Right.
candles and this and that, and everyone, not everyone, but a lot of the people made fun of me, and, quote unquote, made fun of me. But it was like, oh, there must be, it's Antonio, there's a ghost somewhere, so call Antonio, or, it was that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I didn't care. But the interesting thing is that on two separate occasions, two individuals who were absolutely swore that they believed in, none of this stuff. I was crazy. They laughed at all this stuff.
Mhm.
On two separate occasions, came into my office, closed the door, and said, do you really know how to take off the evil eye? Can you tell me? Because I have stuff going on in my life that I need to tell you. Like, it's just outrageous, and there's got to be a curse. So the experience that I've had, so many people do, in fact, believe in the evil eye and in the energy that is born of envy, of jealousy. People do fear it. People do understand sometimes that weird stuff is going on. And then to have the other spectrum, to interview people who said, I want to talk to you about it, but this is something that is, I want to speak to you about it, but kind of in a private way. I don't really want to be completely identified. I want to tell you what my culture does or what was done in my home. The practices of diagnosing the evil eye and then dispelling the evil eye, that's really where we got into big differences.
Mhm.
My own culture, in Italian culture, there's the oil, the water, there's a prayer. Sometimes scissors are used, sometimes matches are used. In the research for the book and in speaking to a lot of people, the definition and the meaning of the evil eye stayed pretty consistent. It was the way people diagnose and then go about curing it that differed from culture to culture, country to country, and that's true even within Italian culture. To diagnose or cure malocchio, things will differ, excuse me, from region to region in Italy.
Sure.
So the oil, the water, excuse me, the prayer, that will differ. Sometimes it's a saint, sometimes it's the Blessed Virgin, sometimes it's Jesus. You know, prayers will differ. The way it's done. Sometimes people will put the plate on their head. Sometimes it's, you know, your hand in the water. That differs even in Italian culture, and in other cultures, it differed as well. I found many people said, no, this is how we do it. This is how I did it from my area, and my family did it this way. Then this is how we knew you had the evil eye. We took it and we threw it in the fire, you know, or
Right.
did it this way, or had this is how we cured it. It was, you know, circles above the head. It was saying this. Also, there are a lot of differences. You know, there's the whole thing I mentioned in the book in Italian American culture. There's this, and in some Italian culture, there's this idea that the whole Malocchio ritual and everything has to be passed on Christmas Eve. I
Oh,
include a Christmas Eve ritual in there that I learned, but that's not true at all. I interviewed many people, many practitioners who did not learn anything on Christmas Eve. They learned it when the aunt, the uncle, the grandmother, the grandfather, the brother, the sister was ready to pass it on. And that might have been on a hot day in July. It didn't have to be
right.
Christmas Eve. So that's what differed, but that's what makes it so ubiquitous, is that you could be anywhere. And I think I mentioned in the book, there was a young man who was Greek who I interviewed, and he was a practitioner and learned how to, you know, the mate is mine in Greece. And he said, I could be anywhere. And he mentioned going on a trip to the Middle East. And he said, I didn't speak the language, but when I started to talk about when I pointed to the, you know, the Nazar or to the Hamsa or to that, we understood what that was about.
Right.
That was completely, oh, I got it. You know, we might be a different culture, a different country, different continent, but I understand what that amulet is for. I get it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
something that always continues to amaze me. And that, and the fact that so many people who, you know, will say to you, oh, you know, this is crazy, that's crazy, but will still say, you know, can I, you know, my kid's being baptized, should I put the red string on the crib, or what should I do? Or, you know,
Right.
I'm in a
Right.
new house, what do I do to, you know, people are looking at me funny, I got the new job, I mentioned too much. So people will still take these, you know, this idea of the evil eye, and they still want to apply it to their lives, understandably.
Well, because it's intrinsic. People know that this is something, oh, I don't believe in that, you know, witchcraft, blah, blah, blah. But you know, at one time my grandmother told me about this thing, and maybe it's true. And, you know, just in case, do what I can do just to make sure that, you know, that's all right and my family's okay. And I feel like it's basic protection magic. Like, you know, and I also think, and this may be out of my own ignorance, so bear with me here, but I think evil eye being someone could cast this curse on you out of spite and jealousy without knowing that they're doing it. That energy of, um, you know, it's not it's not happening because, I mean, sometimes it is. Somebody's like, well, you know, fuck you because I hate you because you're successful. And that happens. That really, really happens. But I think in a lot of cases, it's just that pent up, um, again, comes usually from insecurity of a person and thinking, you know, more success for you means less for me. And it's like, it's not a pie. Um, but if I look at the world at large and we look at what's going on in our world and in our American culture specifically right now in terms of how we're trying to repress people and keep people down, and we're going backwards in a lot of ways out of fear, out of envy, out of jealousy. They're not necessarily realizing that what they could be doing is energetically cursing others.
Mhm.
Do you have a comment or a thought on that?
Yes, because there are I write about three ways that the evil eye basically can be unleashed. The first is just intentionally. You're resentful, you're jealous, that sugar-coated comment, you know, is
Hmm.
underneath it all is, you know, why did he get the promotion and not me? Why does this one have
Hmm.
the house and not me? You know, there's envy in there, and it's intentional. You do want, you know,
Absolutely.
yeah, I want you to suffer a little bit. A lot of people have that. They don't want to admit it, but it happens. The
Mhm.
second part is people will give, if you've ever seen it, I know growing up, there was a big thing. If anyone ever complimented us, like, oh, Italian, oh, my quando si vede, yeah, how adorable. It was always God bless. In many cultures, there's still spitting. It's actually to counteract the evil eye.
Yes.
In case you give it intentionally. That's, or, they'll, you knock on wood, you touch something, or in Italian, it's tocca ferro, you touch the iron, that's to ward it away. And
Oh
that is
my God.
truth.
I'm remembering, you just hit a memory for me of
Yeah,
my grandmother touching something that was iron in her kitchen.
yeah.
Oh my God. Like visceral memory. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Just in
interrupt you.
case. That's just in case.
Wow.
Yeah, which is why people will just in case I gave it to you and I didn't mean to. And then there's the third way, which is boasting, which is why growing up, although I go back to saying we were always encouraged, there was also that sort of thing of don't talk too much about the achievement. Don't talk too much about, you know, this one's new job or this good thing. Don't unveil that new expensive toy to the, right away. Do it little by little because you're going to get the eye. Malok is going to hit you. The eye is going to get you. So do it. Don't boast, and that's true even now. So people can bring it upon themselves by boasting. And I always say, and I say it in the book, be careful about how much you're, talking about these plans that you're making and everything we're doing. Be careful. Be mindful about what's going on because you can bring that upon yourself.
You're
But
attracting envy.
you're attracting envy, but also you're in a way tempting fate. You're
Mm.
what's happening. You're out there talking so much. I always say when you hear something because it's loud and it's somewhere out there, you're going to hear it. And it's kind of the same thing about the eye, how that chattering, that constant, putting on everything on social media, everything there, this life is so perfect, everything is so good. That's great if that's what's happening. Wonderful. God bless you. That's a wonderful thing for you. May the gods keep you going and your family, but keep it to yourself a little bit. So we grew up very much with that. Silence was a very powerful tool. Don't say too much.
Mm-hmm. And
Those are
if
the
you are going to speak about fortune in your life, speak with gratitude about it. I think uh, the universe hears your gratitude, or the universe hears the boast. And I could talk about how much I love living in New England, and I have this beautiful house, and I'm so grateful for this home and this land and this life that I've built. But I'm not saying it to be boastful. I
right.
am genuinely grateful for the circumstances that put me here. And I think when you are being boastful, again, boasting comes from a spot of insecurity. It comes from fear of loss. It comes from, well, I have to show off how great I am because if I don't, other people will think something different of me versus I'm so fortunate. I'm so grateful that this wonderful thing happened to me. Let me share it with you. I think the intentionality
Yeah.
is really important. And one attracts envy because it's coming from a place of uh, disillusion. It's coming from a place of fear of loss. It's coming from a place of I'm trying to make it look like something more than it is,
It is.
a falseness,
Yeah.
versus I'm coming from a place of deep gratitude. And envy isn't attracted to gratitude.
No, it's not. And doing that with the gratitude is a huge, huge thing. And I mention in the book that you don't have to live a life when you take this information, the first step in combating the evil eye is becoming aware of it.
Mm,
The awareness of it is a big, big thing. When you're aware of it, you do eventually start to think differently and act differently and let things or you won't say certain things, but you will say certain things. You do things differently. But I say in the book as well, I'm not trying to scare you into a life of silence, or I'm not trying to tell you don't celebrate this beautiful thing that happened to you or your family or anything, but just be mindful of the fact that envy exists. And I say to people all the time, this book is a friendly reminder about a very unfriendly topic because people don't want to admit, but what I'm going to tell you is true. We have all felt envy for someone or something. We have all also, I believe, been the targets of envy. We've all felt that nasty stare. We've all felt that comment. We felt that energy that was disingenuous, that was, oh, that, what was that about? I didn't deserve that. So it exists, and it is every human being has felt envy, jealousy, anger, resentment, and we've all been on the receiving end of that energy. That's why it's important to understand and to be aware of it, not so that you walk around not in silence, not saying anything, or in any sort of paranoid about what you're going to say, but you have to be aware of it. And this was something I write about in the book as an example. The whole thing, baby showers, I think I mentioned in the book that growing up,
Yeah.
that was I still remember my mother getting an invitation to events, being like, what are they, what is this? Like, what do you mean? You didn't speak about something like that until, it was a very delicate subject. You didn't talk about those things. Even, someone bought a new house. You really didn't know someone
You
got
didn't
that.
know about it until they moved in
Oh, they
and they were like,
moved in
hey,
and they're
we're
like,
having a housewarming party. I'm
yeah,
like, you
I
moved?
just wanted to tell
What?
you, don't send the Christmas cards at that old address this year.
Right.
We moved
Right.
2 weeks ago. We're in a new
Right.
house. The keys are
Right.
done, house is signed.
Right.
That's a big thing. Becoming aware of it is probably the main first step that I always mention to people about, and people have come to me and they do, and since the book has now, it's in the wild, as I say, many people have their copies, many people have started to read things. Yes, I've gotten a lot more emails than I ever have, and people often ask me, and they'll say, this is what's going on in my life, and these symptoms, these signs, what is the first step? I always say, become aware of it and
Yeah.
recognize that it exists, it's there, and there's a reason why the evil eye, it's a superstition, but it's also a belief, and there's a reason why it has survived thousands of years,
Yes.
and why it's
Yes.
still right now the practices are so prevalent. And I mean, look at the jewelry, the amulets, the
Yeah.
nazar,
They're everywhere.
everywhere,
Everywhere. Everywhere.
bed sheets.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
there's a reason for that, because people feel viscerally that understanding about that
It's
energy.
really amazing. And the book is so good. And so I want to know, Antonio, um, what do you hope people get out of this book, your readers? What do you hope they take away from it?
I hope they take away from it an understanding that despite the fact that we are not in control of so much in this world and in our lives, we can be in control of our protection. We can be in control in terms of the energy with regard to the evil eye, and with regard to jealousy, envy, resentment, emotions. It's all energy. Okay, it
Mm,
doesn't disappear, it just changes form. And I hope people take away from the book the fact that this energy exists, it is real, it has probably already affected you in some way without you knowing it. And you can take steps and begin to practice rituals, whether it doesn't, not all the rituals I've written about, or the spells or the magic, not all of it is rooted in a specific religious tradition. A lot of it, there are herbs, there are simple steps you can take, the use of amulets
mm,
to deflect the evil eye. And then if you want to go ahead and learn how to diagnose the evil eye and look at it, you can find that in the book, you can learn. And that's not only for you, but it's because the evil eye affects every area of life. Your own personal life, the lives of your family members, children, your home, your finances, your romance, your love life, anything, it affects every area. Okay, even your cars, the house, everything.
right. Everything.
Um,
Anything that could be an of envy to someone else. And
anything.
that could be your body type or your hair color or anything.
Anything that's like, you can understand that that energy is real, and you can begin to cultivate that sense of, wait, I understand it now, and I get what I was feeling that time that I dismissed
Mm,
a year ago. Was that person making that person was envious, that maybe that person, and by the way, it's not, I always tell people, it's not only we all have people in our pasts who, there's bad blood, there's bad relation, we all made mistakes, that whole, it's not only people in your past who don't want you to succeed. There are a lot of people in your present moment, in your life right now, who for whatever reason don't want to see you maybe get the promotion, maybe get married, have a kid, maybe just who don't want to see you live your best life. And it's a tough thing to recognize.
Yeah.
It is true. And again, I think viscerally we all understand that and know that. But once we come to that awareness and realization, I think people can come away from the book knowing that they can protect themselves and they can understand that that energy is very real, but it doesn't have to be harmful. They can learn how to deflect it, and they can just cultivate more of a sense of self-empowerment.
Wow. Wow. That is
Healing, that's
and yeah. And that is, it's just so powerful. What you talk about is so powerful because again, having that, like you said, sense of control over your own energetic protection from this particular source that could be coming at you from all angles, known and unknown. It's really, really valuable. And it's a really, really good book. And it's, dare I say, incredibly well written. It's just a joy to read. I love your personal stories and being able to get to know you through this text. It's really, really good. I really enjoyed it and learned so much from you. Antonio, where can people buy this book? How can they get in touch with you?
The book, excuse me, the book is available, it officially publishes on Monday, May 1st, but it's available on Amazon, any Barnes and Noble, it's available online. It'll be available in bookstores everywhere. It publishes officially on May 1st. And to reach me, I am on social media, but I'm also AntonioPagliarulo.com and also ItalianWitch.com. Both are the same website there. You
Yay.
can me through there. And yeah, the book is available. Go on to Amazon, go on to Barnes and Noble, go to your local bookseller. If you have an
Yes.
bookseller, go to your local bookseller, ask for it, they can get it.
Independent booksellers are the way to go. If you can't get there, Amazon will do, barnesandnoble.com will do. And check him out.
Many of our witch shops and
Yeah. Yeah. They'll bring it in for you. You've got a favorite local witch shop or a legal favorite local bookshop. Just ask for this book, The Evil Eye by Antonio Pagliarulo. And they'll bring it in for you because local shops and small businesses are amazing.
And I'm gonna apply.
Yeah.
Cover is so beautiful. I actually
gorgeous.
In the book, the book itself is its own kind of amulet. I really feel that. So if you're in the city, you can spot me. I'm walking around with this cradle in my
hang
arm.
it around your neck.
Very funny. I'm trying to find a chain that'll hold.
Yeah, it'll be like the Italian Flava Flav. That'll be.
I have so many amulets. I need another one, but I'll wear it. And look what's beside me, Dawn. I didn't hold them up. There's talk about the Italian. This is what's on my table.
Yes, and I really like. Okay, my producer's gonna be pissed because he's like, keep it to an hour and we're over. But I don't care. Sorry, Corey, you're the best. So, you had posted something a couple of days ago or last week on one of your social medias that said, "How am I like Ronnie James Dio?" And
posted. Yeah.
Okay. And I know the answer to that because my husband is a heavy metal guy. And so I know the Ronnie James Dio story, but maybe our listeners don't. So can you share that lore with us?
Yeah, what I believe happened from what I read is that he grew up with an Italian grandmother, and that he did this because, from what I read, I think he said Ozzy Osbourne used to go out and give the peace sign, and that was sort of Ozzy's thing. And he went and said, "Let me go." And he said, "My grandmother used to do this for the for the evil eye, to ward off the evil eye.
Yes.
And that became his way. He knew this symbol sort of intimately, and he knew it was a good symbol. It was a symbol
Yep.
to ward away, evil, and to, keep the bad energy at bay.
Yep.
That's what his grandmother did. And so he did that, and it just took. I mean, that was
Right.
it.
People thought it was
His
he's
horns
showing
and
devil horns and he's so metal. And really, he was out there blessing the crowd, protecting his fans from the evil eye.
And it's also, by the way, and I know Corey's gonna, I'm sorry, Corey, I'm just gonna say, a lot of people, this I write about in the book, the cornetto here, it's a horn,
Mhm.
but there's a story when Sebastian Maniscalco, the very excellent,
Very excellent Italian comedian. Yes.
love him, amazing. He talks about the story about in his car, he first went to pick up a girl because his father told him about, you're going to get the eye, the malocchio. And he said, I had this in the car. And he said, a girl got in the car and said, why is there a red pepper hanging from your car? And he had to explain it wasn't, but a lot of people don't realize that the symbology, the horns, that's a protective gesture, just like that's a
Yes.
horn, it's not a red pepper. But and
Yes.
this is it, it's the monocornuta is what it is here. And
Yes.
you'll see these horns, and it's what do horns do? They protect.
Right.
That,
Right.
that's what
It's
happens.
just, there's, like you said, it's so ingrained in such a way in culture that you don't even realize. Again, like you're talking about little Ronnie James Dio, like one of the grandfathers of heavy metal, and he's out there protecting his fan base from the evil eye, and everybody's like, yeah, metal. So, okay, last question, I promise, last question. And this is a question I ask to every single guest. It has nothing to do with anything we've talked about. Now, this is kind of a loaded question because you're also Italian. So, but if you could have me as a kitchen witch cook you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
So like a magical meal, like a dish, like a specific meal.
Whatever comes to mind. Some people want me to cook like their great grandmother, something or other, or some people are like, oh, I want you to cook me a dish that is basically for this magical purpose. Like whatever comes to mind.
I think it would be a dish of pasta fagioli, because I grew up, my mother growing up was just the most amazing cook, and that dish for me, um, I don't know, I think of it, it's just a powerful dish. It has everything you need, it's got the protein, the legumes, the beans, and the pasta, of course, too.
Mhm.
I think it would be the pasta fagioli. It's one
It
of my,
tastes like home.
it tastes like home, and and you know what I equate it with? It's funny,
Mhm.
that dish, I equate it with I equate it with safety. And again, not to be corny about this whole, but I equate it with feeling safe, and there's a protective aspect to this
But there
dish in
is,
my mind.
there 100% is, right? Because my pasta fagioli is 4 ingredients, 5 ingredients: olive
Yeah.
oil, garlic, tomato sauce, water, beans, a
Yep.
little red pepper, a little oregano, right? Everything in that is protection and love and prosperity. Everything, you're dealing with, it's heavy on the garlic. That's all prosperity. That's all protection. Like the tomatoes, all love, so it is. And when it's one of the, I actually have my own recipe that's obviously been handed down, up on my website. So if anybody felt like making a big bowl of pasta fagioli, but every Italian makes it different.
Different, yes.
Everybody makes it different. So, I don't know if mine would be the same as the one your mom used to
Oh,
make.
no, yours would, come on, your recipes are outrageous. I've seen your recipe, of course. And I
Thank
also
you.
would, if I can choose two, I'd want you to make me, because I've heard about yours. I want you to make me a risotto, a nice risotto. I would love.
I made the most beautiful risotto. I catered a charity dinner
Yeah.
last week, and I made, shit you not, 5 pounds. So 5 pounds of dry risotto is like 15 pounds of cooked
Yeah.
risotto. And I made a white wine and pecorino romano with fresh peas
Mm,
risotto. It was, no, it was, it
that-
was, it was so good. It was so good. So we'll just have a carb fest.
We'll have a carb, and listen, I'm the weird one in the family. I've been a vegetarian for many years, but I have my pasta fagioli di risotto for me.
Yeah,
like
that's
those
it.
foods. Yeah, and so that's a date, Dawn. We have to have.
Let's do it. When are you coming? When are you coming? Just come.
We're gonna make a date. We're
Just
driving
come.
soon.
Just listen, I live in the land of the New England witches. So come on up.
My favorite place.
You're here. I have a spare room.
Past lives in New England. I'm very happy when I'm there.
I'm telling you, you have to come. And I will make you pasta fagioli and a garlic bread, and it will be wonderful. Okay, so one more question. And this is the important one. Okay. As an Italian New Yorker, is it sauce or is it gravy?
It's sauce. It's sauce. I did not know gravy was what you put on like turkey at Thanksgiving if you went out to a restaurant somewhere, but it was sauce every night, and it was sauce on Sundays.
It was Sunday sauce.
Sunday sauce. My mother even would go as far as Sundays to call it the ragu because she put certain meat in it when I was a kid. But the brajola and all that she would make.
Braciole.
But it's always been sauce, and yes, it's been a discussion.
It is a thing. It is like people go to fight. It's like we go to fisticuffs over it.
We're gonna fight, but it's sauce.
It was for us. It was sauce unless there was meat. So if you had meatballs and braciole and sausage, that was gravy.
Right.
If it was marinara, it was a pomodoro, whatever that was, then it was sauce. Even if it was meat sauce, if you had chopped meat, which they don't say chopped meat up here, they call it hamburger. But if you had chopped meat in your sauce, it was meat sauce, but it's gravy. If it sat on the stove for 15 hours with meatballs and braciole, then it was great.
And it was really, but in my house, honestly, they called it also the sugo. Il sugo was my mother said to make the sugo. We actually didn't, and again, I didn't hear the word gravy associated with pasta or sauce until later on in probably teenagers, because growing up, that the gravy was sort of what was the brown sort of gravy that you put on like other things, but a red tomato sauce was just that sauce. So I never knew it. And then when people started telling me, what are you talking about? That's gravy. I was like, gravy? What do you mean? I want tomato sauce. I was like, I want tomatoes on my pasta. I want tomato sauce.
Right. Don't put poor brown gravy on my pasta. What are you, out of your mind?
Red sauce. And
although come to think of it, that might be delicious.
Well, that's actually, it might very well be.
It might be delicious. It might be really good.
We'll have to try it. But
Antonio, you are an absolute delight. I have had the best time with you.
The best.
You're fantastic.
Please promise me to do this again.
I at some point, and we'll get together and we'll drink red wine and eat pasta fagioli, and it'll be amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge with all of us. And until next time, everyone, I wish you so many blessings and much, much gratitude.